All right, welcome back to another recording on the way of design thinking in the age of AI. And today, it's not necessarily a very philosophical, how do we think about the use of AI? This is more a continuation on demonstrating the use of AI in our day-to-day workflow. And as we experiment with different kind of workflows where we integrate AI alongside our normal practices or our past behavior or past workflows, we get to develop and we get to interact with AI in a new kind of way. So what you see here in front of me is a space in a department store, the beautician area. And so in this beauty and skincare related area, I've just made sure to hide all the brand names. I don't want to encroach on anyone's copyright or privacy or client-supplier relationships, on all those kind of finer things. So what you see here is a beige brown table and a black wall and let's say a slate gray wall. And in front of us are two tables, and red encircled is the carpet, and this is the area that we want to transform and change. And so there's a set of tables that exist in a different department store, and these two tables could come across. And the designer that was working on this day created various layouts. So there's multiple versions of this configuration possible. And here we see on the right hand side the wall with the chair, and then the two tables, and then the display wall. And here we see that space that we can occupy. We also have a SketchUp model which really simply showcases or demonstrates these elements. And again, I've hidden all the products and the text and the name brands. I don't want to disclose that, just to make it as ubiquitous as possible and give everyone the freedom to experiment with their own brands. So for now, we're going to go back to these images. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a relatively simple AI page. And I'm just going to use ChatGPT to do that. And let me just make sure that I use one single page as like a new chat. And then we'll use that chat side by side. So for now, my simplest idea is I'm going to want to demonstrate that these various tables, that they fit into this image. And without me having to go into a 3D model, let's see if we can simply use the images with the AI to join them together. So I'm going to take a screenshot here. I'm going to go back to the AI. I'm going to paste in that screenshot and then say to the AI, please remove carpet and freestanding table / furniture. Okay, let's see what it does with that. Let's make this little screen, or let's make this screen a little bit better. Okay, great. They're going to use a new ChatGPT version, so we can actually decide on either of these two solutions. And what I'm hoping that this is going to create, what I'm hoping the response is going to be, is essentially a clean version of that image, right? Remove everything off the ground so that I can place my own furniture in between or in the foreground. And although it takes a little bit of time for these to be generated, normally if you were trying in Photoshop, even with generative fill to do this, you would struggle to see a difference between the tiles and the walls, etc. Okay, so this image on the right is one option, and I don't know if exactly the image on the left is going to be that much different. No, not that much different. Let's make it big so that it's maybe easier to pick up the differences. I see here that the right image, the tiles seem to deviate a little bit in size, whereas the left image seems to do that once here. So it doesn't say, well, it doesn't show that one or the other is that much different. So let's go for left. This is the response that we like. And then we're going to go to the counters that were visible here. Can take a screenshot of that. And then simply say, please place these white and red counters in the new freed up space. And let's see what it corresponds with. Let's see what it can put together between the two images, our old image and the new image. I'm thinking the scenes which maintain perspective, yes. Should it include the chair? It doesn't know if it should do that. So this is the nice thing. I'm using a thinking model rather than an instant model. I'm letting it decide a little bit longer. Might make the video a bit slower, but that's all right. We don't always want to see instant result. We often also want to see what is the large language model trying to ascertain, how is it statistically determining what it can decipher and potentially recommend to us. Okay, there we go. That's one option. And it says it thought for 50 seconds and it placed these counters. Now it seems that these counters were placed in relative similar angles to the original image that I provided, which makes sense because that is all it knows, all that it can see. And then of course we have our image. So maybe I should say something like, please place these two counters in line with the tiles or perpendicular to the black wall on the left. I'm using whisper flow to sometimes type for me, especially if I've got longer sentences with particularly large words. And with English as my second language, I don't often spell or type those correctly in that sense. So whisper flow is a great way to speed that process up. I must say, after having started using it, I also find that the more that I use it, I also hear myself speak more often. So you become a little bit more fluid or a little bit more clear with how you enunciate your words. So all in all, can highly encourage it. Okay, so it says it is going to implement the latest generated composition with a reference scene and a counter. Not too sure if I'm liking what I'm seeing. Okay, so it's basically starting to create the same error. And maybe what we should do is say, instead of doing a counter perpendicular to the black wall, why don't we ask it to turn the two red counters that it inserted by 90 degrees? Still not correct. Please take the two red counters that we inserted into the background image and turn them by 90 degrees so that the short end of the counter is facing us, the viewer. I'm trying to give it as many instructions as I can at this point. Okay, if this fails, we do have a few more options, and I'm thinking we should perhaps take a look at the SketchUp model. So maybe we should go to the SketchUp model and try and position the camera in the SketchUp model in the same direction as we want our counters to be. And then we could take a screenshot in SketchUp and feed it back to these photographs. Okay, well that is taking a little bit of time. So let's start with that SketchUp image. And so maybe the image that we want is something along these lines. So let's take a screenshot like this. And wait for, oh, so the perpendicular image did quite a good job. The only thing that we might be able to comment is to say, these two counters look great, but the counters look a little bit small compared to the environment that we have. So let's ask for that in the first place. Please scale these counters up by 20%, so make them 120% of their current size. They currently feel a little bit midget, tiny, and a fraction of what they were in the original supplied image. Please correct. Okay, let's see if it can correct that. And then we will say, now also use this additional image with the counter and the chair positioning and the hanging header for an alternative render. Please render in the style of D5, Studio A24, and a general soft photographic retail architecture kind of render style. And who knows if that as a prompt is a good enough prompt or a good prompt altogether. We shall see. Okay, still busy there on that side. Let's go back to our image for a moment, this image 02. And because we're in Affinity, we can switch to the pixel persona. We can go to our artboard creation tool. And we already have one artboard. And let's create a duplicate one so that we have two side by side. And then what we can do without distorting this image, we're going to move this background over, and then we're going to trim our artboard so that all we see is that exact photo. And then we're going to export that, and we can do it as a PNG. Yeah, it won't be exactly that high in pixel count. No, actually, we don't want this specific image. We need to go back here, and we need to take this image. So let's say save this image, and we will save it to the desktop as clean retail environment. Okay, let's leave that and then close this part of the browser down. Okay, so this was our first version, and we wanted to upscale it by 20%, and then this is our second version. All right, already a much better configuration. Unfortunately, what is now sitting on the countertop doesn't seem to be in touch with what was happening in the photographs, right? On the photographs, there were multiple screens. There were a few of these products. There were also some light boxes and some other display elements. Because we removed the products out of the SketchUp model, we won't create that kind of detail. But now let's try it with the SketchUp photo or the SketchUp sketch, the 3D model line drawing. So hopefully the prompt is sufficient enough to create that photographic rendery style, and the orientation and the layout is sufficient enough to marry well with the background. Okay, so it's planning an alternative render with new elements. That's great. We shall go back to the SketchUp model. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool which you can find on the camera called Match New Photo. And then we go to our desktop, and then we import that clean retail environment. Now, if you've never used Match Photo, I do understand that this is quite an overwhelming view of your current photo, but all we have to do is align the perspective lines. So let's use the top of the black wall. Let's take the nodes of the other side, and then let's do the same with the green wall. And bring that in and bring that there. Okay, so now our nodes are showing us our perspective lines, and I do get the sense now that what we have in front of us here is aligned, and our specific eye height level, we won't alter that, but it is an indication of what is the sort of the photographic horizon event line. And then we can, if we hover over the vertical axis, the blue axis, we can zoom in and out. So you can see how this scales the unit up. And what this is saying is that every block, so every part of the grid that you see, is has got a certain spacing. And in that spacing, we can roughly calculate what the what the size and the height of the object is. So if the grid spacing, as it says here in the bottom, is 1500 millimeters, so let's make it a meter, then that means that currently what's visible in here is about 2.2 meters or so, 2.3, which I think is pretty realistic. So all we have to do now is we have to right click and say we're done with the Match Photo tool. And then we can select all our assets. And now if we move it along an axis, you can see we get a good sense of this sitting inside our model. Now, unfortunately, the Match Photo tool is almost like a watermark. So what it is doing, it is both showing itself as behind our 3D model and in front of our 3D model. Hence, we are losing the textures of our object. Not to worry, we can go to the edit function of styles. We can go to the watermark section and we can say Match Photo, foreground photo, turn that off, and then background photo stay on. So you can see I can turn it on and off. I can turn the foreground photo back on and I can reduce the opacity of that. And I can just turn it off. Okay, now I get the sense that the scale of this, let's measure this out. This measures about 3.8 meters. And each tile, I know from reference, is about 600 millimeters. So 5 tiles is 3 meters. And this at the moment is 3.7 meters, almost 3.8. So if this is only 3 meters, I need another tile to match the scale. So I'm going to say edit the matched photo, and then I'm going to scale the model up slightly. And then this is then tile 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that is then tile 6. And I think that it's not easy to see, so let me move the model over a bit. And you can see if I stick to the axes, especially if I go backwards, I maintain that perspective. So you can see if I now go from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 is 3 meters, remember that. And then the end is that difference. So let's right click and say edit match photo. Zoom in and out ever so slightly. I'm trying to do that using the vertical axis. And this is now 6 tiles, so 3.6. So we need to actually go a little bit bigger. And then we are done. Now, if we move our object forward, so again, I'm going to select our object and move it in line with the axes. So I'm staying on the red axis and then I move it over. And that gives us a pretty realistic view of what this would look like in this space. Now, if we simply use the move command and we rotated the object, so let's rotate it 180 degrees, and then we go back to our matched photo scene. Now you can see the different orientation of the space. And let's do this one last time by bringing it 90 degrees towards us, and then we position it again. So you can see I can create 3 different perspectives, 3 different angles by rotating the space around, which means that if I started to pay attention to my initial plan views, I could recreate my plan views now by moving this component's parts around without distorting the background photo. Okay, let's go briefly back to our SketchUp view. And here we can see that without the use of SketchUp, sorry, I misspoke. Let's go back to our AI view. Without the use of our SketchUp environment, if we simply use the AI environment, then this is how it inserts this element into the space. You can see it's starting to use a little bit of its own interpretation of the space to generate this part of the model. So you can see we go from a clean space to misaligned again, to perpendicular, rotated correctly, to slightly improved in scale, and then to immersively insert our SketchUp environment into the render. And now what we should do is we should go back to our SketchUp model, zoom out a little bit, and we will take a picture on top of the image, or maybe even better, we'll take a picture outside of the image and then insert that screenshot and describe the same thing. Please render this image out using the D5 render style, the Studio A24 cinematography style, add a general soft photographic retail architecture render style, and keep the position of the furniture as is. And then we upload that prompt. And then this all together then forms the basis of creating these renders, these imagery, to showcase to a client what their options are. And so within 20-30 minutes, we have a side photograph that doesn't give us too much or doesn't give us enough sufficient information. We clean that up using AI. We merge that with an existing retail environment. We place that existing retail environment in the new location where it will be retransported or redistributed. And in that distribution and that placement, we see that it's not aligned. We then struggle a little bit to use the AI to tell it to orientate it in a way that we see fit. Then we increase it in scale, and then we import on top of it our SketchUp environment, and then we present our SketchUp environment within that design, and we get a much better render out of that than whatever we were doing inside of SketchUp currently. If we then continue with this line of thinking and we move this element now, let's say 180 degrees, so we look at it from the other side, we create the same match photo environment and we paste it in like that. Then we go back to our render setting within the AI. Please do the same thing as before and render this out. We have changed the orientation of the furniture on the pad. Do not introduce a new carpet. Let's leave the floor gray, concrete gray as is. Okay, that might give us just enough performance-wise out of the assets that we supplied. Now, of course, these are AI renders. These are not meant to be perfect renders. These are not meant to showcase or demonstrate that this all functions and is 100% what it is. These are conceptual. These are schematic in nature. These are not fine-comb tooth, clean CAD drawings. These are not technical for CNC cutting of carcasses. These are mere render artist impressions in the laziest form possible. Okay, so here's a preview visible to us now. And let's zoom in a little bit. And it captures that quite nicely. The floor has now completely become concrete. That's maybe not what we said. We didn't want the tiles with the carpet. And it has created some infill on the left because we didn't have anything there. And it has filled in some elements on the right. But overall, it seems to have struck quite a nice balance between what is in the photo and what was from our render element. What it's doing here with the lighting doesn't seem to be ideal, but one could select the selection brush and then highlight certain areas and say things along the line of, please remove these LED lights or these TL lights and introduce spots. And we're not going to do that now, but that is just to help you isolate certain elements. So we're going to stop here for today. I think this is more than enough. We're 20 minutes and a bit in. And this workflow is a small demonstration of what you can do with a single side photo and a single client product photo matched together using AI to create a comprehensive 2D sticking images together and a 3D making use of Match Photo as a tool to render elements out. I hope this was helpful to you. Please like and subscribe and let me know of any further questions that you have within this workflow. And if not, then that's all for today. And I wish you a wonderful time ahead.